Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Do you think Dante's Divine Comedy is just a poem about hell and heaven? Well, what if I told you it is actually a coded manual for spiritual awakening, filled with hidden messages that connect Christianity, Islam, and ancient Templar secrets? Today, we are looking past the surface to find the ultimate truth about God and the universe by unlocking the esoteric meaning of Dante's work based on the analysis of René Guénon.
I mean, that is really the perfect way to frame it. It is great to be here because most people just read that surface layer, you know, the adventure story, the demons, the punishments.
Right, they see the locked treasure chest and just assume it's a heavy box.
Exactly. But if you have the keys, the box opens.
And Guénon is definitely a heavy hitter when it comes to finding those keys. We're specifically looking at his book, Dante and Religious Symbolism in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, and his core thesis there is, well, it's pretty mind-blowing for a lot of people. He argues that Dante wasn't just a poet with a really vivid imagination. He was an initiate.
An initiate into hidden knowledge.
Right. He wasn't writing fiction.
Yeah.
He was documenting a profound spiritual reality. But he had to hide these deep metaphysical truths behind what he called strange verses.
Because the general public, and let's be honest, the church authorities at the time, they just weren't ready for that kind of truth.
They absolutely were not. And Dante actually warns you about this directly in the text.
Oh, yeah, there's that one specific line. He says, "O you who have sound intellects, look at the doctrine which hides itself beneath the veil of the strange verses."
He is literally giving you the instruction manual right there.
Right.
He's saying, don't just stare at the monsters in hell. Guénon breaks this down into 4 levels of meaning that you can pull from the text. You have the literal story.
The guy walking through the afterlife.
Exactly. Then you have the philosophical meaning and the political or social meaning. But the 4th one, the most important one, is the esoteric, the metaphysical meaning.
And that is where the real controversy, or I guess the heresy, lies. Let's actually talk about that word, heresy. Because when people hear about hidden meanings in Dante, they usually jump straight to, oh, he must have been secretly anti-Christian. Or maybe a pagan.
Which is a huge misconception. Guénon is incredibly clear that this is not about heresy versus orthodoxy in some sort of political sense. It is really about the difference between exotericism and esotericism.
Okay, break those down for us.
So exotericism is the outer religion. It's the public worship, the moral rules, the literal stuff you do in a church on Sunday.
A rule book.
Right, the rule book. But esotericism is the inner knowledge. It is the direct, unmediated experience of God.
So if exotericism is reading the menu, esotericism is actually eating the food.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Guénon argues that true metaphysics is universal. It isn't strictly Christian or Islamic or pagan in a partisan way. It is just the study of the absolute, the study of God.
Which feels like a massive shift from how we evaluate God and religion today. Because in the modern world, we usually see this really hard binary line. You are either a traditional believer reading the literal rule book, or you are an atheist who only trusts material science. There's no middle ground for direct spiritual experience.
And that binary choice, that superficial belief versus total atheism, that is exactly what Guénon calls the profane view.
The profane view.
Yes, because in Dante's time, for a true initiate, science and faith were not enemies. They weren't opposed at all. The physical sciences were actually seen as symbols for higher spiritual truths.
So everything in the material world was just a reflection of something higher.
Exactly. So when a modern atheist critic looks at Dante and says, oh, his physics are wrong, or his symbolism looks like weird paganism, they're totally missing the point.
Because they don't have the keys.
Right. They're evaluating it through this modern atheistic lens that assumes the material world is the only real thing that exists. But for Dante, the material world was the least real thing.
It was just a shadow.
Just a shadow of God's reality.
That is a seriously heavy concept to wrap your head around. The idea that the world we touch and see every day is just a shadow. I want to dive into the specific evidence Guénon provides for this universal truth, especially the Islamic connection, which is fascinating. But before we do, let me just say, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. It really helps us keep bringing you these deep dives.
It definitely helps keep the conversation going.
Okay, so let's get into the Islamic connection, because most people, they think of Dante as the ultimate pristine Catholic poet. But Guénon points out that Dante owes a massive debt to Islam.
This is truly one of the most striking parts of Guénon's analysis. He goes into detail about the similarities between Dante's Divine Comedy and the night journey of the Prophet Muhammad, known as the Isra and Miraj.
And we're not just talking about vague, superficial similarities here, right? It's not just, hey, a guy goes on a spiritual trip.
No, the architecture of the stories is hyper-specific. In the Islamic tradition, the prophet is guided by the archangel Gabriel. Dante is guided by Virgil. But look at the actual geography of the afterlife they describe. In both accounts, hell isn't just a random pit of fire.
Right. It's a very specific shape.
It is a cone, a giant funnel made of concentric circles that descends deep into the earth.
Like a stratified amphitheater of pain.
Exactly. And then as they ascend out of it, they both go through these very specific heavenly spheres. And the final vision. In both the Islamic account and Dante's poem, God is perceived as this intense, singular point of light surrounded by concentric circles of angels.
Guinan mentions a specific historical figure here, Ibn Arabi. Who was he?
Muhyiddin ibn Arabi. He was an incredibly important Sufi mystic, often known as the Great Sheikh. He wrote a text called The Book of the Night Journey and another called the Meccan Revelations. And he wrote these about 80 years before Dante wrote his poem. Yes. And when Guénon compares the texts side by side, the layout of hell is nearly identical. Even the 3 ablutions, these specific washings that souls have to undergo to purify themselves before they can ascend into heaven, they are present in both works.
Okay, but hold on a second. Dante is a guy living in Florence in the early 1300s. There's no internet. There are no public libraries stocking deep Islamic mysticism in Italy. How on earth does he know this?
That is the million-dollar question. It wasn't like Dante was just casually checking these books out of a local library. Guénon points to the transmission of this knowledge through secret knightly orders.
The Templars.
The Templars, yes, and other orders that were stationed in the East. They were over there fighting the Crusades, sure, but they were also living there for decades. They were talking. They were exchanging deep esoteric ideas with Islamic mystical orders.
So they were bringing these ideas back to Europe.
Yes. And Guénon suggests this is ultimate proof of what he calls the doctrine of unity.
Which is what, exactly? Break that down for us.
It is the idea that at the absolute highest level, the esoteric level, different religions are really just different languages trying to describe the exact same divine truth.
So it completely refutes the idea of a partisan God.
Exactly. A God who only accepts people with the correct political or religious label. For the true initiate, the ultimate reality of God is the same everywhere. Dante used this Islamic imagery because, frankly, Ibn Arabi had mapped the spiritual territory better than anyone else in Europe at the time.
I love that. So Dante wasn't stealing from Islam. He was recognizing a shared universal truth.
He was speaking the universal language of initiation.
Which leads us perfectly to the people Dante was actually hanging out with. If he wasn't just this lone, isolated genius, who were his people? You mentioned the Templars, but they were a strict military order. Was Dante a soldier in the Middle East?
Not a Templar knight in that specific military sense, no. But Guinan connects him to a third order that was closely associated with them. He discusses a secretive group called the Fade Santa.
The Holy Faith.
Right. And there is this medal that Guinan analyzes in the text. It belonged to Dante's secret society, and it has a string of letters on it. FSKIPFT.
Which just looks like a terrible computer password.
It totally looks like gibberish.
Yeah.
And for a long time, standard scholars tried to force it into regular Latin titles, but it never made sense. Guinan decodes it as Fide Sancte Kadosh.
Kadosh. That does not sound Latin.
Because it isn't. It is Hebrew. Kadosh means holy or consecrated. And what is fascinating is that this specific term is still preserved today in the high degrees of Freemasonry.
Wow.
Guinan is connecting Dante directly to an unbroken initiatory lineage that runs right through the Templars and eventually evolves into what we now know as the Rosicrucians and the Masons.
See, I always thought the Rosicrucians came way later, like in the 1600s.
Their public manifestos were published later, yes. But the symbolism existed much, much earlier. Think about the name itself. Rose and cross. In Dante's Paradiso, the final ultimate vision of the blessed souls in heaven is arranged as a massive white rose.
And there's a cross too, right?
Yes. In the sphere of Mars, he sees this massive luminous cross. And the colors match up perfectly too. Beatrice, Dante's guide, is always described wearing very specific colors.
Green, white, and red.
Right. On the exoteric surface of the poem, these represent the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity, or love. But esoterically, they are the exact specific colors of certain high Masonic grades.
So Guinan is arguing these weren't just Dante's fashion choices for his characters.
There were signals.
Yeah.
These orders weren't just political clubs or trade unions for stonemasons. They were true initiatory organizations. Their entire goal was to lead their members to the center of the world. to achieve spiritual enlightenment.
Let's talk about that center, because Dante's universe has very specific, profound geometry, and the most terrifying part of it has to be the center of the Earth.
Yes, and this is where we really have to talk about gravity, but not just as a physical force, as a spiritual force.
Right, because most people picture the devil ruling hell from a fiery throne, maybe poking sinners with a pitchfork. But Dante's Lucifer is completely different.
He is. He is frozen solid in a lake of ice at the absolute dead center of the planet. Dante explicitly says he is located at the point where all weights converge,
So why ice? Why isn't it fire down there?
because he is as far away from the warmth, the love, and the light of God as it is structurally possible to be. But the real key here is that concept of weight, gravity. Gravity pulls everything down, towards the center, towards maximum compression and density.
So Lucifer represents the ultimate heaviness of physical matter.
Exactly. He represents the ego. He isn't ruling anything down there. He is trapped by his own massive weight. He's crushed by it.
He is the literal manifestation of the force pulling us away from God.
Yes. In Hindu metaphysical theory, which Guinan references quite often, this is known as the state of tamas. It means darkness, ignorance, and inertia.
Which brings us right back to our modern evaluations of atheism.
It really does.
Yeah.
Guinan argues that the modern profane view atheism, strict materialism, is essentially a subconscious worship of this spiritual gravity. It is the belief that matter is all there is.
So if you believe only in the material world, you are spiritually frozen in the ice right next to Lucifer.
It is the ultimate spiritual trap. You are stuck at the bottom of the gravity well. And this is exactly why Dante's exit from hell is so deeply significant. To leave, he literally has to climb down Lucifer's hairy flank, past the exact center of gravity, and turn himself completely upside down.
He has to completely flip his perspective.
He has to reverse the fall of man. To reach the light, you have to actively move against gravity. You have to fight the downward pull of the material world and your own ego.
It's not just a casual drift upward.
No, it is a grueling climb. It is an active, intentional fight against the weight of physical existence.
I just love that image. We are all fighting spiritual gravity, but Dante doesn't do this alone. He has guides. Virgil gets him through hell representing human reason. Beatrice takes him higher representing theology. But the final guide, the one who actually takes him to the ultimate vision of God, is Saint Bernard. Why him? Why not a famous pope or a brilliant philosopher?
This is a crucial detail in Guénon's analysis. Saint Bernard was a Cistercian monk. He was a deep, contemplative mystic. But he was also a man of action.
He wrote the rule for the Knights Templar, didn't he?
He did. He preached the Crusades. He perfectly represents the balance of action and contemplation. But even more importantly for our discussion on atheism and God, Saint Bernard represents the absolute triumph of intellect over reason.
Wait, aren't intellect and reason just the same thing?
In our modern everyday language, sure, we use them interchangeably, but for Guénon, they are complete opposites. Reason is merely human logic. It's the ability to categorize, analyze, and dissect material things.
Like a computer processing data.
Exactly. But intellect, in the traditional esoteric sense, is intuition. It is the direct spiritual knowing of God. St. Bernard actually had a very famous historical conflict with a man named Peter Abelard.
Abelard was the big logic guy, right?
Abelard was the ultimate rationalist. He wanted to use human logic to dissect religious faith. He tried to explain the deep mysteries of God using the exact same tools you would use to do geometry or engineering.
So Abelard is essentially the ancestor of the modern scientific materialist. He's the guy saying, if I can't prove God with a logical syllogism on a chalkboard, God isn't real.
Spot on. And St. Bernard completely crushed him in debate. Bernard argued that human reason has a hard ceiling. You can analyze the ink on the menu all day long, but you cannot taste the food with your brain.
You need the heart.
You need mysticism. You need direct experience. Guénon is telling us that if Dante had chosen a philosopher or a scientist as his final guide, he would have never seen the face of God. Human rationality cannot enter the highest heaven. Only love and intellectual intuition can get you there.
And that distinction explains so much about the God versus atheism debate today. The atheist is constantly demanding logical, material proof for something that requires a completely different organ of perception entirely.
That is the great tragedy of the modern world, according to Guénon. We have completely hypertrophied our reason, and we have let our intuition completely atrophy. We are absolute giants of logic, but we are dwarfs of the spirit.
We are really good at building incredibly complex logical cages for ourselves. Speaking of complex building, we absolutely have to touch on the math in Dante's work, because apparently the Divine Comedy is also a massive numbers game.
Well, calling it a game implies it is just for fun. For Dante, it was a deeply sacred architectural structure. The numerology in the poem is hyperspecific.
Give us the highlights of the numbers.
The number 3 is obvious, right? It represents the Christian Trinity. But Guénon points out the constant, repeated use of the numbers 11 and 22.
Why those numbers?
They were secret numbers used by various initiatory groups. The poem itself has 3 main sections. Each section has exactly 33 cantos, plus 1 introductory canto, making it even 100. And every single line of the poem is exactly 11 syllables long.
That takes an insane amount of planning. And then there are the prophetic numbers he drops in, like the 515 versus 666.
Right, this is where the political meets the apocalyptic. 666, as most people know from the Book of Revelation, is the number of the beast. In Guénon's esoteric context, it represents pure materialism. It represents humanity entirely severed from God.
The profane world we've been talking about.
Exactly, and opposed to that is 500 phi.
What does 515 mean?
In Roman numerals, 515 is written as DXV. Dante presents this as a mysterious messenger of God who is sent to kill the beast. Guénon suggests this might be a code for a leader, a dux, or perhaps a highly elevated initiate who restores spiritual order to the world. But there is also a much darker, practical theory Guénon offers regarding the structure of the poem itself.
A darker theory. About the numbers.
He suggests Dante might have altered the poem midway to hide the number 11 more carefully. You have to remember the historical timeline here. The Templars were suddenly arrested in 1307. Their Grand Master was burned at the stake in 1314.
Oh, wow. So Dante is actually writing this poem during the massive purge of the Templars.
Exactly. His friends, his spiritual brothers, were being actively hunted, tortured, and executed by the authorities. The strange verses weren't just a fun literary puzzle. They became a literal survival mechanism.
He's just trying not to get burned at the stake himself.
He was being incredibly careful. He took the esoteric truth of these secret orders and locked it securely inside the rhyme scheme and the numerology so it couldn't be destroyed by the king or the pope.
It's basically a spiritual time capsule. He buried the secrets of the Templars and the universal knowledge of God inside a poem about hell so they would survive the Inquisition.
And it worked brilliantly. We are still sitting here decoding it 700 years later.
It really is incredible. So let's bring this all home for everyone listening. We have gone from a simple poem to a coded map of the universe. We've linked Islam, Christianity, secret knightly orders, and this epic fight against the spiritual gravity of atheism and materialism. What is the ultimate big takeaway from Guénon's analysis?
If we step all the way back, Guénon is telling us that Dante's entire purpose is to invite us to find the center.
The center?
We talked earlier about Lucifer being trapped at the physical center of the earth, the center of gravity and density. But there is another center, the spiritual center, the heart of the world.
Is that an actual physical place?
No, it is a state of being. To reach the heavens, to truly experience God, one must find that center within themselves. The modern world has entirely lost this. We are completely decentralized. We are profane.
We just run around the outer circumference of the wheel.
Yes, distracted by the material world. We are constantly pulled down by Lucifer's gravity.
We're busy arguing about politics and looking at our phones while we slowly sink into the ice.
We are weighed down by our own egos. Dante's journey isn't just a fantasy story about what happens to you after you die. It is a direct challenge for the living right now. He is inviting us to reverse the fall, to turn ourselves upside down, to stop being pulled down by the heavy weight of the material ego, and to start actively ascending toward the stars.
It really is a powerful reminder to always look for that fourth meaning in everything we encounter. Don't just read the literal surface of the world. Look for the hidden spirit inside the letter.
Precisely. The ultimate truth of God is always there, hiding just beneath the veil, waiting for anyone with a sound intellect to see it.
So here's a provocative thought to leave you with today. If Dante and the mystics are right, and this physical material world we obsess over is just a heavy weight pulling us down, what gravity in your own life is stopping you from seeing the stars? What material obsession or rationalization are you holding on to that keeps you frozen in the ice?
That really is the ultimate question we all have to ask ourselves.
This has been Thinking Deeper by 6-7.